Ladies and gentlemen, today, we delve into one of Singapore's most notorious landmarks, Changi Prison. Known today as a high-security facility for some of the country's most dangerous criminals, its past is shrouded in tragedy, resilience, and wartime horrors. From a colonial-era prison to a brutal World War II internment camp, Changi's walls have witnessed immense suffering, but also remarkable stories of survival. Before Changi Prison became infamous for its dark history, it was originally built by the British in 1936 as part of their efforts to modernize Singapore's penal system. Designed to hold around 600 prisoners, it was a state-of-the-art facility at the time, incorporating the latest architectural advancements for security and inmate management. The prison was constructed in Changi, a relatively remote area on the eastern side of Singapore, to isolate criminals from the city's population while still ensuring law and order in the British colony. Changi Prison was built to replace the overcrowded and outdated Outer Prison, which had been in use since the 19th century. The new facility was designed with large, well-ventilated cells, high-perimeter walls, and a strict surveillance system to minimize escapes and maintain discipline. Prisoners housed there included both common criminals and political detainees who opposed British rule. The British colonial government implemented a strict but structured penal system, focusing on discipline and rehabilitation. The prison was run by trained wardens who enforced strict routines, including physical labor, limited recreational activities, and harsh punishments for disobedience. The daily schedule of inmates involved early wake-up calls, manual labor, and rationed meals, with little room for comfort. Despite its reputation as a tough correctional facility, Changi Prison was not known for extreme brutality during its early years. However, this was soon to change dramatically. By the early 1940s, with World War II looming and tensions rising in the region, the peaceful existence of Changi Prison as a colonial correctional institution would be completely transformed. When the Japanese invaded Singapore in February 1942, the prison's original purpose was abandoned, and it became a key site in one of the most harrowing chapters of the war, the internment of Allied prisoners of war, POWs, and civilians under the brutal rule of the Japanese Imperial Army. As Singapore fell to the Japanese, Changi Prison was no longer just a correctional facility. It became a symbol of occupation, oppression, and unimaginable suffering. Thousands of British, Australian, and other Allied prisoners would soon be crammed into a space originally designed for just a few hundred inmates, setting the stage for one of the darkest periods in the prison's history. The fate of Changi Prison took a drastic turn in February 1942, when Singapore fell to the Japanese Imperial Army after the swift and brutal Battle of Singapore. The British, who had long considered Singapore an impregnable fortress, were caught off guard by Japan's highly coordinated land, sea, and air attacks. The fall of Singapore was one of the greatest defeats in British military history, and it marked the beginning of a dark chapter for thousands of Allied soldiers and civilians who were taken as prisoners of war, POWs. Almost immediately after capturing Singapore, the Japanese forces repurposed Changi Prison into a massive internment camp. Designed to hold 600 inmates, the prison was soon overflowing with over 50,000 prisoners, including British, Australian, Indian, and other Allied soldiers, along with a significant number of civilians. The cramped conditions, lack of sanitation, and extreme overcrowding made survival incredibly difficult. Prisoners were forced to sleep on cold cement floors, often with no bedding, as disease and malnutrition spread rapidly through the ranks. Food was scarce, and the Japanese provided only minimal rations, a meager diet of rice, watery soup, and sometimes small portions of vegetables or meat. This diet was barely enough to sustain life, and many prisoners suffered from severe malnutrition, leading to diseases such as beriberi, dysentery, and scurvy. Clean drinking water was also limited, forcing prisoners to drink contaminated water, which further increased the spread of illness. Beyond the physical hardships, life in Changi Prison was marked by the constant fear of brutal punishments. The Kempitai, the Japanese secret police, were notorious for their ruthless methods of interrogation. Anyone suspected of espionage or disobedience faced horrific consequences, including severe beatings, starvation, and even execution. Some prisoners were subjected to water torture, electric shocks, and other cruel methods designed to break their spirit and extract information. Many were taken away for questioning and never seen again. Despite these conditions, the prisoners at Changi displayed remarkable resilience. To preserve their sanity and morale, they established secret schools, organized religious services, and even held makeshift theatrical performances. They also created an underground network to share food and medical supplies, often risking their lives to help their fellow inmates. Some doctors and nurses among the prisoners secretly treated the sick and injured using whatever limited resources they could find. One of the most remarkable aspects of Changi's wartime history is the creation of the Changi murals, a series of religious paintings secretly drawn on the walls of the prison chapel by British POW Stanley Warren. These murals served as a beacon of hope and faith, reminding prisoners that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could not be broken. While Changi Prison itself was a place of suffering, it was also the starting point for many prisoners who were later sent to even harsher labor camps. Thousands of POWs were taken from Changi and transported to construct the infamous Thai-Burma Death Railway, where they endured forced labor under inhumane conditions. The railway project resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of prisoners due to exhaustion, starvation, and brutal treatment. For those who remained within the prison, liberation did not come until August 1945, when Japan surrendered following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As Allied forces reclaimed Singapore, they were met with the horrifying sight of emaciated, disease-ridden prisoners, many of whom had barely survived the torment of captivity. The liberation of Changi Prison was a moment of relief and sorrow, as the full extent of the suffering endured within its walls was finally revealed to the world. Changi Prison, under Japanese occupation during World War II, became synonymous with terror, brutality, and inhumane treatment. What was once a colonial prison meant for rehabilitating criminals turned into a nightmare for the thousands of British, Australian, Indian, and other Allied prisoners of war, POWs, who were crammed inside its walls. The Japanese Imperial Army, particularly the feared Kempeitai, Japanese secret police, used Changi as a center for interrogation, torture, and executions. The Kempeitai had absolute power over the prisoners, and their methods of interrogation were ruthless, often crossing the boundaries of human cruelty. Many prisoners were accused of spying, resisting Japanese rule, or attempting escape, sometimes based on the flimsiest evidence. Once suspected, these individuals would be taken to special interrogation rooms, where they would endure hours, sometimes days, of torture designed to extract confessions, whether true or false. One of the most feared methods was water torture, where a prisoner was forcibly tied down and large amounts of water were poured down their throat. Once their stomach was painfully bloated, their captors would then jump on their abdomen or strike them hard, forcing the water out violently and causing intense pain. This process was often repeated multiple times, leading to internal injuries, suffocation, or even death. Another notorious method was beatings with iron rods, bamboo canes, or rifle butts. Prisoners would be forced to kneel for long periods while guards struck them repeatedly, sometimes breaking bones or causing deep lacerations. The Kempeitai did not discriminate. Officers, soldiers, and even civilians, including women, were subjected to these brutal beatings. Starvation and sleep deprivation were also used as psychological torture techniques. Some prisoners were locked in dark, tiny cells for weeks, given little or no food, and deprived of sleep until their minds and bodies began to break down. Others were left in open spaces, completely exposed to the sun, forced to kneel on gravel or hold heavy objects over their heads for hours. If they collapsed, they were immediately beaten or executed. Executions were a frequent and terrifying reality at Changi. The most common method was beheading by katana, samurai sword. Prisoners were often lined up and forced to kneel in front of their executioner, who, with a single swing, would decapitate them in front of their fellow captives. These public executions were meant to instill fear and suppress any thoughts of rebellion. Another method of execution was death by firing squad. Prisoners, usually suspected of sabotage or espionage, were taken to nearby beaches or secluded areas within the prison compound. They were blindfolded, tied to wooden posts, and shot at close range. Some were forced to dig their own graves before being executed. Mass executions also took place, especially towards the later years of the war when the Japanese feared uprisings or Allied landings. Entire groups of prisoners would be marched out of the prison and never seen again, their bodies either dumped in mass graves or lost in the dense jungles surrounding Changi. In addition to direct torture and executions, many prisoners died from the sheer brutality of forced labor. The Japanese frequently took groups of POWs from Changi and sent them to work on the Thai-Burma Death Railway, where they were forced to construct railway tracks under extreme conditions. Those who refused to work were beaten to death or executed on the spot. Despite the overwhelming cruelty, prisoners tried to resist in whatever small ways they could. Some smuggled messages to the outside world, while others worked together to hide food and medicine from their captors. However, if the Japanese discovered these acts of defiance, the punishments were swift and brutal, often resulting in the execution of multiple prisoners as an example to others. Even after the war ended and Changi Prison was liberated in August 1945, the scars left by the Kempei's reign of terror remained deeply embedded in the memories of survivors. Many former POWs suffered from severe psychological trauma, chronic injuries, and haunting memories of the relentless torture they endured. The brutality inflicted within Changi's walls became one of the most horrifying chapters of World War II, a reminder of the depths of human cruelty in times of war. Despite the unimaginable suffering that took place within Changi Prison during the Japanese occupation of Singapore, stories of resilience, courage, and survival emerged from behind its oppressive walls. Allied prisoners of war, POWs, and civilian detainees, faced with starvation, disease, and the constant threat of execution, found ways to preserve their humanity, dignity, and even hope in the face of extreme adversity. One of the most remarkable aspects of life in Changi was the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the prisoners. With food supplies scarce and rations barely enough to survive, prisoners learned to improvise and share. They would ferment food scraps to create vitamin-rich supplements, barter with Japanese guards for small portions of extra rice, and even grow vegetables in secret gardens. Inmates who had medical knowledge, including doctors and nurses, did their best to treat the sick and wounded, often with nothing more than herbs, makeshift tools, and a deep will to save lives. A secret underground medical network was formed, where prisoners smuggled medicine into the camp, sometimes bribing sympathetic Japanese guards with whatever they could offer, a piece of cloth, a hand-carved trinket, or even labor. These makeshift medical efforts saved countless lives, as diseases like beriberi, dysentery, malaria, and scurvy ran rampant due to malnutrition and poor sanitation. Beyond physical survival, prisoners also found ways to maintain their morale and sanity. One of the most incredible acts of resilience came in the form of education and intellectual pursuit. Despite the dire conditions, prisoners established makeshift schools, where fellow inmates taught subjects ranging from history and mathematics to music and foreign languages. Those who had been teachers or professors before the war shared their knowledge with others, turning Changi Prison into an unlikely center of learning. Religious faith also played a crucial role in keeping spirits alive. The prisoners constructed a simple chapel using whatever materials they could find, and it became a sanctuary for many. Christian, Jewish, and other religious services were held secretly, providing comfort to those who had lost hope. One of the most famous examples of spiritual resilience was the creation of the Changi murals, a series of beautiful religious paintings secretly drawn on the prison's chapel walls by British POW Stanley Warren. Despite suffering from illness and malnutrition, Warren painted these stunning depictions of biblical scenes, giving his fellow prisoners a sense of peace amidst the horrors surrounding them. Music, theater, and literature also became powerful tools of resistance. Prisoners wrote plays, performed comedy sketches, and even composed music using whatever scraps of material they could find to craft props and costumes. These performances, held in secret, were more than just entertainment. They were a form of defiance against their captors, proving that their spirit could not be broken. Acts of covert resistance were also common. Some prisoners secretly wrote diaries and kept records of the abuses they endured, hiding these documents in the hope that one day the world would know the truth about Changi Prison. Others risked their lives by smuggling messages to the outside world, providing valuable intelligence to the Allied forces. Some brave souls even attempted escapes, although very few were successful due to the high security measures and the risk of execution if caught. One of the most astonishing survival stories involved the strong camaraderie among the prisoners. Despite the brutal conditions, prisoners formed deep bonds of brotherhood, always looking out for one another. If one man fell sick, others would give up their rations to help him recover. If someone was too weak to work, fellow prisoners would step in, risking their own punishment to protect their comrades. These small acts of kindness and solidarity made the difference between life and death for many. Even though Changi Prison was a place of immense suffering, it was also a place where the unbreakable strength of the human spirit was put on full display. Through education, art, faith, friendship, and defiance, the prisoners of Changi fought to preserve their dignity and humanity in the face of overwhelming cruelty. With the surrender of Japan in August 1945, Changi Prison's dark chapter as a prisoner of war, POW, camp came to an end. As Allied forces entered the prison to liberate the surviving detainees, they were met with a horrifying sight. Emaciated, disease-ridden prisoners, many barely clinging to life after years of malnutrition, forced labor, and brutal treatment. For many of the POWs, freedom came too late, as thousands had already perished due to starvation, disease, or execution. The horrors of Changi Prison left deep psychological scars on its survivors, many of whom suffered from post-traumatic stress, chronic illnesses, and permanent disabilities for the rest of their lives. After its liberation, Changi Prison underwent a significant transformation. The British reclaimed control of the facility and immediately began repurposing it to serve a new role in post-war Singapore. One of the first actions taken was to detain and prosecute war criminals. Members of the Japanese Imperial Army and the feared Kempeitai, Japanese secret police, who had tortured and executed prisoners during the occupation. Many high-ranking Japanese officers were tried for war crimes in Singapore, with several sentenced to death by hanging or firing squad. These trials marked the beginning of justice for the countless lives lost within Changi's walls. As Singapore slowly rebuilt itself, Changi Prison was once again used as a maximum security facility, this time under the British colonial government. However, its role had expanded. The prison not only housed common criminals, but also political detainees, insurgents, and individuals involved in anti-colonial movements. The post-war years saw growing resistance against British rule, with groups fighting for Singapore's independence. Some of these political activists, accused of rioting, sabotage, or subversion, found themselves locked inside Changi's cells. During the 1950s and early 1960s, Singapore faced increasing social and political unrest, including the rise of communist insurgencies in Malaya and the struggle for independence. The British authorities used Changi to detain individuals suspected of being involved with the Malayan Communist Party, MCP, and other anti-colonial groups. These detainees were often held without trial under emergency laws, fueling anger and resistance against British rule. By 1963, Singapore had gained self-governance, and in 1965, it officially separated from Malaysia to become an independent nation. With Singapore's newfound independence came the need for strong law enforcement and security measures, and Changi Prison remained at the heart of this system. Now under the control of the Singaporean government, it was modernized and reinforced to accommodate a new category of high-profile inmates: dangerous criminals, drug traffickers, and those sentenced to death. Singapore's strict legal system, particularly its harsh anti-drug policies, led to a significant increase in the number of death row prisoners housed at Changi. The country introduced some of the world's toughest drug laws, including mandatory death sentences for drug trafficking, and Changi became the primary facility where death sentences were carried out by hanging. The prison's execution chamber became a feared place, with convicted drug offenders, murderers, and other serious criminals awaiting their final moments behind its heavily guarded doors. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Changi Prison expanded its role as Singapore's top maximum security facility, known for its strict discipline, high-tech surveillance, and limited prisoner privileges. Escape from Changi was virtually impossible, as the prison was equipped with high walls, barbed wire fences, armed guards, and later, advanced electronic monitoring systems. Changi also became known for its rehabilitation programs, as Singapore's government aimed to reduce crime rates through strict discipline and structured correctional policies. The prison introduced education and vocational training programs for select inmates, allowing them to learn new skills and reintegrate into society after serving their sentences. However, for those facing life imprisonment or death sentences, rehabilitation was not an option. Their fate was sealed within Changi's heavily fortified walls. By the 1990s, as Singapore rapidly developed into one of the world's safest and most disciplined nations, Changi Prison remained a symbol of law and order. It stood as both a reminder of Singapore's colonial past and a key pillar of its modern justice system, continuing its function as the country's most secure prison for high-risk inmates. As Singapore entered the 21st century, Changi Prison continued to evolve, cementing its reputation as one of the most secure and efficient correctional facilities in the world. Despite its grim past, the prison underwent extensive modernization efforts to accommodate the growing needs of Singapore's legal and penal system. The transformation was aimed at making the facility more secure, technologically advanced, and efficient while maintaining Singapore's tough stance on crime, especially in cases involving drug trafficking, violent crimes, and terrorism. Reconstruction and modernization. In 2004, the old Changi Prison complex, which had stood for decades, was demolished and replaced with a state-of-the-art facility known as the Changi Prison Complex. This massive project combined various smaller prisons and detention centers into a single ultra-secure correctional facility capable of holding more than 23,000 inmates. The new prison featured high-tech security systems, biometric identification, electronic surveillance, and reinforced cells to prevent escapes and maintain strict order. One of the most notable additions was the Integrated Security System, ISS, which allowed the authorities to monitor every part of the prison through a centralized control system. The use of facial recognition, motion detectors, and automated cell door controls significantly reduced the possibility of riots, breakouts, or unauthorized movements within the prison. Unlike older prisons where guards had to conduct physical head counts, automated tracking systems ensured that every inmate was constantly accounted for. Despite these modernizations, Changi Prison maintained its reputation as a high-security facility for Singapore's most dangerous criminals. The strict discipline, limited privileges, and harsh penalties for misconduct inside the prison made it one of the most feared correctional institutions in Southeast Asia. Notorious inmates of Changi Prison. Over the years, Changi Prison has housed some of the most infamous criminals, terrorists, and high-profile inmates in Singapore's history. These cases have drawn international attention, reflecting the country's no-nonsense approach to crime and justice. 1. Drug traffickers and death row inmates. Singapore is known for its zero-tolerance policy on drugs, and under the Misuse of Drugs Act, anyone caught with a certain quantity of drugs, such as 15 grams of heroin, 30 grams of cocaine, or 500 grams of cannabis, faces the mandatory death penalty. As a result, Changi Prison has seen hundreds of convicted drug traffickers awaiting execution over the years. One of the most high-profile drug cases was that of Nguyen Tuong Van, an Australian man arrested at Changi Airport in 2002 for attempting to smuggle heroin. Despite international protests and appeals from the Australian government, he was hanged at Changi Prison in 2005. His case became a major global controversy, highlighting Singapore's strict drug laws and unwavering enforcement of capital punishment. Another infamous case was Yap Wong Wah, a Malaysian engineer convicted in 2015 of sexually abusing more than 30 young boys in Singapore. His crimes, described as some of the most heinous in Singapore's history, led to multiple life sentences in Changi Prison. 2. Terrorists and extremists. Following the September 11th attacks in 2001, Singapore intensified its efforts against terrorism and extremist activities, leading to the arrest and detention of several radical individuals. Changi Prison became the primary holding facility for members of terrorist organizations, particularly those affiliated with Jamaat Islamiyah, JI, a Southeast Asian militant group linked to Al-Qaeda. Among the most infamous detainees was Mas Selamat Kastari, a JI leader who was responsible for planning attacks against Singapore. In 2008, he made headlines after escaping from Singapore's Whitley Road Detention Center, leading to one of the largest manhunts in the country's history. He was eventually recaptured in Malaysia and transferred to Changi Prison, where he remains under strict surveillance. 3. White-collar criminals and corrupt officials. Changi has not only housed violent offenders, but also corrupt businessmen, fraudsters, and high-profile white-collar criminals. In 2016, former banker Yeo Jiawei, a key figure in the 1MDB scandal, one of the biggest corruption cases in Southeast Asia, was sentenced to prison for money laundering and financial fraud. His imprisonment at Changi underscored Singapore's firm stance against corruption, even for well-connected individuals. 4. Murderers and violent offenders. Changi Prison has also held some of Singapore's most notorious murderers. Among them was Adrian Lam, a self-proclaimed medium, who, along with his wife and mistress, was convicted of the brutal ritualistic murders of 2 children in 1981. His crimes shocked the nation, and he was executed by hanging in 1988. Another chilling case was that of Anthony Ler, a man who hired a teenage assassin to kill his own wife in 2001. Ler's case became infamous because he showed no remorse, even smiling in court. He was sentenced to death and executed in Changi Prison. Strict security and daily life for inmates. Life inside Changi Prison is highly regimented and tightly controlled. Prisoners follow a strict daily routine that includes early wake-up calls, limited meals, exercise periods, and vocational training for select inmates. The majority of prisoners spend 23 hours a day inside their cells, with only a brief period allowed for outdoor activities. Meals are simple and based on strict nutritional guidelines, often consisting of rice, vegetables, and a small portion of meat or fish. Inmates are not allowed luxuries like televisions or private possessions, and all communications with the outside world are strictly monitored. For those on death row, the experience is even more isolating. Inmates sentenced to execution are held in solitary confinement, with limited contact with other prisoners. They are only allowed family visits under strict conditions, and once a prisoner's execution date is set, they are notified only a few days in advance. Changi's reputation as a high-security facility means that escape is almost impossible. The combination of electronic surveillance, armed guards, and high-tech security measures ensures that no prisoner can leave without authorization. A symbol of Singapore's justice system. Despite its harsh conditions, Changi Prison is seen as a key pillar of Singapore's legal system. The prison reflects the country's commitment to strict law enforcement, low crime rates, and tough penalties for serious offenses. Many Singaporeans view Changi as a necessary deterrent against crime, reinforcing the message that lawbreakers will face severe consequences. Changi Prison remains one of the most feared and respected correctional facilities in the world, known for its efficiency, discipline, and no-nonsense approach to criminal justice. Its modern infrastructure, combined with its historical significance, ensures that it remains a powerful symbol of order and authority in Singapore. Changi Prison is not just a high-security correctional facility. It is a symbol of Singapore's resilience, strict justice system, and historical transformation. From its origins as a British colonial prison to its grim role during the Japanese occupation and its present function as one of the most secure prisons in the world, Changi's legacy is deeply woven into the fabric of Singapore's history, a remnant of Singapore's darkest period. One of the most enduring aspects of Changi's legacy is its connection to the horrors of World War II. The suffering of thousands of prisoners of war, POWs, within its walls remains an integral part of Singapore's collective memory. Today, the site of the original prison serves as a historical reminder of the brutality inflicted upon Allied soldiers and civilians during the Japanese occupation from 1942 to 1945. To honor those who endured unimaginable hardship, the Changi Chapel and Museum was established near the site of the former prison. This museum preserves the stories, letters, drawings, and personal accounts of the prisoners who suffered and survived Changi's darkest years. The Changi murals, painted by British POW Stanley Warren, remain a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. These religious murals, created under extreme conditions, serve as a lasting memorial to the faith and hope that kept many prisoners alive. The Singaporean government has made efforts to educate future generations about the sacrifices made by POWs and the civilian population. School programs, guided tours, and exhibitions at the Changi Museum ensure that the history of wartime suffering is not forgotten, a reflection of Singapore's no-nonsense approach to crime. In modern times, Changi Prison's legacy is also closely linked to Singapore's globally recognized law enforcement policies. The prison stands as a symbol of the nation's zero-tolerance stance on crime, particularly regarding drug offenses, violent crimes, and corruption. Singapore's strict penal system is one of the harshest in the world, yet it is credited with creating one of the safest societies globally. The country's low crime rate, efficient judicial system, and severe penalties for serious offenses have often been linked to Changi Prison's role as a deterrent against crime. The mere thought of being incarcerated in Changi is enough to dissuade many from breaking the law, reinforcing the government's message that crime does not pay in Singapore. The prison's reputation is particularly associated with Singapore's controversial but effective death penalty for drug-related offenses. While human rights organizations frequently criticize Singapore's strict laws, the government has stood firm, arguing that its policies have prevented the spread of drug abuse and organized crime. Changi Prison has therefore become a symbol of both fear and order, representing the city-state's unwavering commitment to maintaining law and discipline, modernization, and the future of incarceration. Despite its historical significance and reputation for strict punishment, Changi Prison has also been a center for penal reform and modernization. The Singapore Prison Service, SBS, has gradually introduced rehabilitation programs, psychological counseling, and skill-building initiatives for inmates who demonstrate a commitment to reform. In recent years, technological advancements have further transformed the prison system. Changi's use of AI-driven surveillance, biometric scanning, automated prisoner tracking, and smart prison technology has made it one of the most secure and technologically advanced prisons in the world. These innovations allow prison authorities to manage inmates more efficiently while minimizing the risks of prison violence, escape attempts, or contraband smuggling. At the same time, Singapore has recognized the need to balance strict punishment with effective rehabilitation. The government has introduced education and vocational training programs to help prisoners reintegrate into society after serving their sentences. The introduction of Yellow Ribbon Project, a rehabilitation initiative, aims to reduce recidivism rates by offering former inmates a second chance through employment opportunities. While hardened criminals, drug traffickers, and terrorists continue to be housed under maximum security conditions, the shift towards inmate rehabilitation and reintegration for lesser offenders is an acknowledgement that not all criminals are beyond redemption. This evolving approach reflects Singapore's broader efforts to maintain its reputation as a tough but fair society, where justice is meted out swiftly, but rehabilitation remains a possibility for those willing to change. Changi Prison's influence beyond Singapore. Changi Prison's efficiency, strict discipline, and advanced security measures have become a model for other nations seeking to improve their penal systems. Several governments have studied Singapore's approach to prison management, crime deterrence, and security technology to enhance their own correctional facilities. Additionally, Changi's legacy as a wartime prison camp has drawn interest from historians and researchers worldwide. The stories of heroism, survival, and brutality within its walls continue to be studied in war history and human rights discussions. Singapore's efforts to preserve this dark chapter of its past, while moving forward with modern prison reforms, set an example of how a nation can balance remembrance, justice, and progress. Changi Prison remains a crucial part of Singapore's identity, serving as both a reminder of its past struggles and a key player in its future crime prevention strategies. Changi Prison stands as a stark reminder of Singapore's turbulent past, while playing a critical role in its present and future. From its grim history as a prisoner of war camp during World War II to its transformation into one of the world's most secure and technologically advanced correctional facilities, Changi's legacy is one of suffering, resilience, and justice. For some, it symbolizes the horrors endured by thousands of POWs who suffered under the Japanese occupation. For others, it represents Singapore's uncompromising stance on crime, ensuring that justice is swift and the law is upheld with unwavering discipline. Whether feared for its harsh punishments and high security measures or respected for its role in maintaining law and order, Changi Prison remains an integral part of Singapore's identity. As Singapore continues to evolve, so too does Changi Prison. While it remains a fortress of justice, modern reforms emphasize rehabilitation and reintegration, proving that even the most formidable institutions can adapt to a changing world. Yet, no matter how much time passes, Changi's dark past and formidable reputation will never be forgotten. It will always stand as a symbol of discipline, deterrence, and the price of lawlessness in Singapore.